Donated to Aid Atlanta. So I encourage you to get a head start on your Christmas shopping, engage in some Christmas cheer, and contribute to a very good cause in doing so. As part of today's festivities, we've got a special kind of author signing and reading today. It's the first time I think we've had a cookbook author here. So instead of doing an elaborate reading, he's actually going to do some cooking for us, and we're going to get to do some tasting. So I encourage everybody to kind of come up into the cafe so you can see the demonstration, partake in the tasting, and join me in welcome Glenn Powell. He is the chef behind one of the most popular restaurants in Atlanta, Agnes and Muriel's. It's one of my favorites. The cuisine there is labeled, I guess, the food that you wish your mom had made, kind of southern comfort food with a touch of kitsch, a touch of panache. Is that right? I love the food they make there, and Glenn has had so many requests from patrons asking for recipes that he's set out and done a cookbook that has been published by Longstreet Press and is available here tonight. He'll be signing copies of that, answering questions, and tonight showing us how to make holiday pies. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Glenn Powell.
Well, I'm really thrilled to be here at Outwrite, and it's funny because I really started my career as wanting to be a writer for children, and for children's television and children's books, and decided in the middle of my college career I hated that, and decided to go back to my roots, which was actually cooking. I was raised in the Catskills in upstate New York, which is a big resort area that really had its heyday back in the 40s and the 50s as a Jewish resort area for residents of New York City who would get away from the heat and the congestion of the city and go up and just breathe the cold, crisp mountain air during the summer, some of the days before air conditioning. And I was raised in a household of 4 kids. I was the youngest in the family, and we always joked about my mother, who is Muriel. There actually is an Agnes, and there is a Muriel. Muriel is my mom, and Agnes is my business partner's mom. And my mother really wasn't a great cook, and she did it 3 times a day, 7 days a week. And she had 4 kids, and she cooked every day for about 20 years. And I didn't really appreciate the cooking as I had to eat it, and neither did my siblings. But I realized later on that she really hated cooking, and she did it because that's what she thought she was supposed to do in that generation, being raised in the 50s and 60s. I got interested really in cooking when I was out somewhere with my parents, and we came home, and my brother, who was home from college, made one of our family cookie recipes. It's Aunt Tilly's honey balls, and the recipe is in the cookbook. And I looked at my brother and I said, well, gee, if he could make that, I guess anybody can. It's a question of just following a recipe. And that's really how my interest in cooking started. I worked in a small resort hotel in the Catskills, in the kitchen, and as a bellhop, and as a waiter, and just always had a call for food. For food, it was always in my blood. And when I decided to leave Boston University, where I was going to school to be a writer, I decided to move down to Atlanta, where my brother had gone to school at Emory, and my sister had lived, and I visited a lot. And I really liked the urban environment versus the small, tiny town I was from, and decided that I would really start my adulthood here. This was over 20 years ago. I got a job working as a baker for the peasant restaurants. The company was pretty new at that time and had 4 restaurants. And I was hired to bake cookies and brownies at one of the cafeteria restaurants that the peasant owned. And as the peasant grew to be a 35-unit multi-state corporation and developed the mix concept, and my responsibilities grew from being a cookie baker to the director of menu development. And my career changed to sort of an interesting thing, where I was hired to go around the country and even travel internationally and go to restaurants. And I was paid to eat at restaurants, sometimes 2 dinners a night, and order 5 or 6 entrees and interpret what the chef in the restaurant was trying to do, and interpret those ideas for the restaurants here in Atlanta and nationally. And I ate at a lot of wonderful restaurants and traveled a lot and ate a lot. But when I came home, I was just hungry. I wanted like normal food. And I swore to myself that if I saw one more big white plate with all these fancy squiggles of sauces on the plate and the tuna pan-seared and fanned just so, as if a battery of cooks was handling it in the kitchen, I was just going to scream. I just wanted normal food. As the years went on at the Peasant, I was there for about 14 years. The company had changed quite a bit. It had been bought and sold several times, and one of my coworkers and I had discussed doing something together, and something in the food business. We didn't know if we wanted to cater or have a special events facility or develop a food product and market it. The first thing we decided to do was to rule out owning a restaurant. We said, no restaurant, it's too hard, we don't want the lifestyle, we don't want the headaches, that's not what we want. And we sort of bantered about ideas. And one day I was reading a trade magazine, and there was an ad for a pancake mix. It's a full-page picture, and it had a stack of pancakes on this old-fashioned plate with the square of butter on the top and the maple syrup dripping down the sides. And I said, my God, that is real food. And that's what I want to do. I want to do like normal food, nothing bizarre, no terribly interesting ingredients that are there to educate the diners, but just something that was very nurturing. So I ripped out the ad and I showed it to Agnes's daughter, and I said, this is what we should do. And she said, what, on a pancake house? I said, no, just serve like normal food. And that's how the idea of Agnes and Muriel's came about. We named it after our moms, and we just wanted to do normal food. We do some very traditional food like grilled pork chops, but we top them with cinnamon apple fritters. We make pot pie, but we make it with fresh grilled salmon. We do great boneless buttermilk fried chicken. It's one of my favorite things on the menu. We do big desserts, and we're going to sample one of those after the talk tonight. And we do 18 different vegetables. We do collards with lemon and sesame seeds. We do old-fashioned mashed potatoes made from scratch with butter and heavy cream. And the one thing that we realized as we started doing work for the restaurant is, you know, a lot of these old-fashioned recipes aren't really very difficult. And if you think about it, the moms in our generation, they weren't chef students, they didn't go to culinary school, they didn't go to cooking demonstrations. They just learned how to cook, and they did it every day, and they had very, very simple recipes. And when we started to do the recipes for the restaurant, they were also very simple, just in much larger ingredients, like 30 pounds of potatoes and 20 pounds of butter. Years later, and we actually celebrated our 5th anniversary being open last week, I had entertained the idea of doing a cookbook, and you know, that's sort of a hard thing to do from, you know, how do you get it published, and I really didn't have experience with that. And I was approached by Longstreet, which is actually based here in Marietta, to do a cookbook last year. And it took about 6 months to write and to get edited. And the one thing I was insistent with the art director is that when you look at the book, that it look like Agnes and Muriel. So for those of you who've been to the restaurant, you could recognize the colors and the design. And if you open up the cookbook, you could see that a lot of the recipes just call for 4 or 5 ingredients. And it's just a question of tossing everything together. And a lot of good basic home cooking is just that. There's no reason to be terribly elaborate. What I'm going to do today is demonstrate how to make a fruit pie. This is an apple pie. I don't think there's anything more American or more mom-like than an apple pie. We serve this at the restaurant in season. We're making it with apples and cranberries this week, in addition to our peach raspberry cobbler. And it's really a very, very, other than having this fake crimping that you get right out of the freezer, just lift it up and re-crimp it. And Scott, would you mind coming up and holding this while I re-crimp it? And it's pretty simple. I'm right-handed, and I take my index finger and my thumb and my index finger and just go around. Turn this just a little bit. And keep going. And it just makes it look homemade. If you really want to cheat, take the pie crust out of the aluminum pan and put it in your own pie pan. And that way there's no evidence at all that you used a frozen pie crust. And this is probably the hardest part of the recipe, is re-crimping the crust. The next thing is just tossing a few ingredients together. We have yellow delicious apples that we've cored and wedged and peeled, and we're going to add sugar and flour and cinnamon, a little bit of salt, and a little bit of lemon juice. We're just going to toss all of that together. And that's the second hardest part of the recipe, is just tossing the apples and the sugar and the flour together. And we're going to pour that into the crust. But then you have an alternative for the pies, to either get another frozen pie crust and defrost it and put it over the original pie crust, or what we do at the restaurant, we make this crumbly streusel topping. And you can see that on the pie. And I think this looks very homemade, and it's really delicious. It's nice and crunchy, and it's made with butter and cinnamon and flour and sugar. So that's going to toss it. We put in a little bit of cinnamon. Now you can see I'm approximating, but all the actual measures are in the cookbook, so there's no mystery to it. And the people who make it at the restaurant are not professional cooks. They are semi-skilled cooks that we hire, and we say, here's the recipe, just follow it. We watch them make it. We show them again how to measure, how to level off a cup measure. But there's no special technique that anybody needs to make this pie. Scott's going to pour the apples into the pie crust. And this is something that's going to look a little bit different. And if you make the recipe, you're going to say, well, it's way too many apples. But the apples shrink down, and we're going to have a pie that's really, really tall. Wow, that's really, really tall. And this will actually shrink down as it cooks. And then the topping is made with equal parts of sugar and flour. It's a half a cup. A little bit of cinnamon. And there are exact measurements in the cookbook. And then we crumble butter, which is somewhere, into the flour mixture. There are many ways to do this, and sometimes when you read a cookbook and it talks about biscuits or pie crust, it's said to take a pastry knife or take two knives and go like this, and it's too much of a workout. And you're going to dirty your hands anyway, so I just crumble it and use my hands. And this is how I make the streusel topping. And there's no terrible art to this. You just want to make sure that you haven't melted the butter, because if you melt the butter, you're just going to have a solid mass of greasy flour. Just going to crumble this on the top. And then sprinkle this, and it looks like this. Really crumbly, no solid mixture. And this will turn into this after about an hour and a half in the oven. And you can tell when it's done, not by the timing, because everybody's oven is different. You want to look at the edge of the pie, and you'll see that it's really syrupy. So everything cooks from the outside in, from the top down, and the bottom up. The last place of the pie to get done will be the very center. So take a knife, just poke around in the center, and see if it's syrupy in the center. And if it's syrupy...
Okay, everybody, don't be back. Come on up.
Are you
I've
still
got the
taping?
serving utensils.
Can you part with 10 copies?
I think the first printing was 10,000.
Oh, okay.
We've got
Do you have more?
No, we have.
Or should we take one
We've
from
got
here?
54. Yeah, they're all up here.
Take one from here.
Yeah, so go ahead and grab them from. Let him sign them first.
Oh, I'll catch up with you. I'll sign them for you. And with you get a gift with purchase. You get a piece of apple pie.
All right. 12 pieces.
I'd also like to point out that along with tickets for the High Museum's photography exhibit of Elton John's collection of photography. It's been a very popular exhibit. Tickets have been hard to get. And thanks for the demonstration and all the hard work.
You look like you want some pie. Yeah. There you go. That I didn't want to put in the cookbook because, well, could you get like commercial melon? I guess it's the base of something. Could you?
I just have to say, I saw your uniforms. That's all. Whatever you want to do.
Is it? Can you put my name? What's your name? Sid. Okay, thanks.
Great. Thanks, Sid. Okay.
Oh, did you get that?
And then you just want me to do the day for everyone else? Like December 2000 or
Actually,
Happy
one to
Holidays?
us, one to Happy Holidays, Valerie. A friend of ours in Florida that we've run there several times. And then I'll see what else.
We can pull this out with instead if you prefer, Glenn.
That'd be great.
Guess I'll get one too. I've been threatening to do it all week. So.
Individualize or just do Happy Holidays on the other? Happy Holidays is fine. For Terry Taylor, you need to say something.
Yeah, this would be fine.